Welcome back, everybody. Now, universities across South Africa will open soon, but they are warning students they will not accept walk-in applications. However, EFF leader Julius Malema says poor, deserving students should avail themselves at the university of their choice. Now, this comes after President Jacob Zuma announced last month that there would be provisions for free higher education for poor students. Now, this has left many skeptics criticizing the move, saying that the country can't afford it and that there is absolutely no plan at all in place to implement the new policy. Well, my next guest says free higher education is possible, and he joins me now in studio. I'm joined by Mugobe Maurice Masuta, who is the director of the Center for Emerging Researchers. Mugobe, thank you so much for joining us, and warm welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you say free higher education, it's about time that it happened.
Yeah, it's long overdue.
Is it feasible?
Well, way beyond feasible. In fact, it's not even the issue of feasibility. It's an issue of life and death. You see, when you have the bulk of your population young and economically inactive and unemployable, the only precondition to any form of progress is skilling those young people for them to become economically active so that you have some degree of reliable economy moving forward. So the feasibility of free higher education in itself must not be interpreted through narrow budgetary interpretations, but it must be looked at as a real investment and not a cost with very well-known economic, social, cultural and even political returns for the country. And I was just telling someone yesterday that for every graduate that you produce who become economically active, employed, and therefore being able to invest back in the country, you save a lifetime of social grant, a lifetime of free houses. So in a way, by another way of saying it is that by providing free higher education...
But is there a plan to fund it?
Well, that's why I'm saying by providing free higher education for the bottom 90% of South African families, as government has done, you have actually given workers in this country, including the unemployed, the biggest salary hike they've ever seen in their lifetime. Let's come to the issue of the plan. I think this is really blown out of proportions. NSFAS launched a student-centered model last year, wherein all students applied centrally to NSFAS, not to a respective university. And already they have received the spaces that they have been oversubscribed. So the question of whether there's a plan or not, it's misplaced. The question is, which is probably worthy of asking, is, are all students who have been approved of a free higher education grant will be able to enter the university? And the question is that, yes, they will be able to enter the university provided they have a firm offer from the university. So you have an enrollment planning that universities subscribe to. This year, they will only have 203,000 spaces available for everyone who wrote matric, either this year or in previous years. And that number doesn't change. So it doesn't matter when you matriculated, for as long as you've got a solid space at a university in the form of a firm offer, which is a precondition for accessing the grant, then you are going into the university. So even the issue of walk-ins, it must not be blown out of proportions.
Maurice, I guess the big issue here, first of all, A, it is the timing of the announcement of free higher education. B, and it flies in the face of the Her Commission, which said that free higher education will cripple government coffers. I mean, this is do you agree with me when I say that, this is just mere populist politics and a political game, and in the long term, the students will be left as pawns?
I would argue that your interpretation is misplaced and can be guided. One, because the timing issue. Students, let's start with the fact that free higher education is a 10-year-old resolution of the ANC since Polokwane, reaffirmed in Mangaung and Nazareth. But number two, students demanded a reforming of the currently commodified higher education in 2015. The president listens to them. He convenes a commission in 2015. Right? That commission takes 2 years to come up with an interpretation of what should happen. Government takes just 3 months to process it. Are people expecting President Zuma to take his entire term of office to interpret a 750-page document? It is highly out of order of South Africans and anybody to claim that somehow there's something wrong with the timing. But you are coming to the issue of destroying government coffers. It is economically false to believe that free education is a threat to the economy. In fact, the contrary is the case. And there are just two examples I can give you.
Well, fair enough, Maurice, fair enough.
If you want to understand why this...
We haven't got much time, unfortunately. Okay. But then the Freedom Charter does provide that free education is... it does provide for free education, but only to the extent of basic education. And the Constitution as well does provide that everybody has the right to a basic education, including adult basic education.
Yeah, you are misinterpreting both documents. The Freedom Charter Charter does say that higher education must be made accessible in the form of government allowances or scholarships. Yeah, put that aside. The Constitution of South Africa says government must make higher education increasingly accessible within reasonable means. The argument we are making is that the South African government has reasonable means, and in fact it would be suicidal for the South African government and economy to harbor an army of unemployed and unemployable youth in the name that we can't afford to fund them. And I was just telling you that all countries with free higher education have much stronger public purses and much greater social returns than countries that have commodified higher education. So South Africans must not be confused. This is their demands. Government has responded to student demands.
We're really out of time, but then in 10 seconds, you've been quite critical of Vice Chancellor, saying that they've been in cahoots with banks by preventing them to give student loans. What do you mean by this?
Many of them have endorsed that 150 billion rand loan scam, which meant to tie both government and students to lifelong indebtedness to commercial banks, something which government has rejected. So Vice Chancellors need to be constructive and stop acting as though they are the arbiter or final arbiters or authority on public policy in South Africa. Only government takes decisions on policy. They've been consulted on the issue of absorption of the 8% fee increment for children coming from the bottom 95% of South African families, and it must end there. In any case, they are the ones who have been saying, don't come to us for free education, go to government. So Vice Chancellor must not disrespect us as well.
Maurice Masuta, thank you so much for chatting to us this morning. We appreciate your time. That was Mukobe Maurice Masuta. He is the director for the Center for Emerging Researchers, talking to us about why he thinks free higher education is feasible. And as I just mentioned, it actually flies in the face of the Hare Commission, which did say that free higher education will cripple government coffers. But then he disagrees with that. That is Maurice Masuta speaking to us live in our Johannesburg studio. All right.